FBI profilers, right? She's like, yeah. I'm like, you know how they're looking for people's criminality. They're trying to profile to see how the brain went wrong and it's all criminal in there. These kinds of things, like how do we get type to that level in different access points for people? Coaching or therapy work or profiling work you want to do? Well, if you have access points and people can follow down that trail, that gets them to you to be able to provide some of the help that you want to provide someone. Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So we're still in Florida. We just finished our Personality Profiler Training live event. It was an exciting event.
Fabulous event.
And we're still here in town. And we thought, you know what, we actually did a recording at the event that I want to go into here in just a moment, roll into that video, do a little setup here. I want to set the stage for where we're heading. Anyway, we're still in Florida. You can tell we've got a makeshift set we're utilizing right now because we're going to be heading home soon. But we want to get this podcast recorded before we leave town, and then we'll be driving home.
Right. We're at your folks' place in Florida.
Yeah. So profiler training, 5-day live event, comes at the end of 6 months of training. So we have enrollment every 6 months. Students study like around the personality profiling material, and then they come to the 5-day live event to connect it in a real way.
Right. And the material is not only the system, but also the methodology of profiling.
And the goal is at the end of the 5-day event, they're going to do their first in-person, well, not in-person, like person to person, but live call. We do it through Zoom because it's easier to get volunteers around the world for it. In fact, you might be listening right now and be one of the volunteers I just met like last week.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the whole point is you get to do your first profiling session if you haven't done one by now. And so we walk you through, you may know nothing about type, zero information about type. And by the end of the program, you're sitting down with somebody and having a conversation, one-to-one conversation, helping them arrive at their best fit personality type. That's the situation we're at. And Karen came to me. Karen, ENFP Preferences, said, I signed up for your PLP program. I thought it was just gonna be some like videos and training. She's like, I didn't know you were to do like personal direct coaching with me and change my life. And then I just signed up for profiler training. I thought I was gonna learn like a little bit of like how to read other people. She's like, I didn't know this was also going to change my life and help me understand how to relate to people and all this. So it was a fantastic event. And in the midst of it, I realized what the piece of this all is missing. And we're gonna roll in the video where I talk about this. The reason why I think people don't understand some of the life-changing experiences they have when they come to some events that we do is our events are very experiential and operational. They're very applied. We take personality type, but it's not a lot of learning on paper. People, I think they assume when they sign up for something that it's going to be a lot of like learning and like school, like academic, content. And while there's tons of that, we try to make it as experiential, visceral, and applicable as possible.
Yeah.
Maybe to a fault. Maybe we would do better in business if we gave people more of the academic route rather than the hey, this will work and change your life and change your client's life.
Right.
Because people seem to want to study and not apply things a lot. Like that's what I've noticed. So it might be an uphill battle. Maybe I chose poorly. Maybe this is the wrong way to go. But it's certainly been impactful in our lives and how we've used it for coaching and all the things we've done.
It's dharma for us, so we can't not do it. Yeah. It's like it might be smart to make it less quote unquote operational or less experiential. But it's what we're here to do. So I guess we have to keep doing it. So you actually took the talk we're about to roll into. It's you and I and Dr. Dario Nardi on a panel. We're just having a conversation one evening and one of the evening events. Yeah. And I think you took from some of the talk that we recently, was it BAPT? Was it the British Association of Psychological Type?
No, it was the one in America, the Association of Psychological Type International.
Oh, it was APTI.
Yeah, so we just gave a talk there a few weeks ago.
Okay, I wasn't sure because I know that we had done a BAPT one recently too. And you effectively, you started the conversation out with the material from the talk that we presented at APTI, which is turning type operational. Yeah. And the antithesis to this is leaving type entirely theoretical. Yeah. So as we roll into it, this is us. You can, effectively, like you did at APTI, because, you go to APTI and you expect some groundbreaking information on the system and to see it from a different angle. But really, we are attempting to almost And I think APTI does a great job of this because most of them are professionals that have been using Myers-Briggs in a professional career capacity for like decades and decades. So they are not necessarily the target audience, because they're people who very much understand how type can be made practical, rubber hits the road, etc. But I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage people just generally in type communities, or anybody who like listens to our content. Do not allow this to stay in the realm of theory. It is way too powerful for that. It is way too powerful for that. So, so that's kind of the basis for the talk that that you get. And it's not really talk; it's kind of a conversation
between you, me, and Dario.
But between the three of us. But it's like, what are the opportunities? As you listen to this, I would encourage you, the listener, to go, how can I do as they're suggesting? How can I take it out of the realm of theory and make it practical in my life?
Yeah. All right. Without further ado, let's take you to the main stage at the Personality Profiler Training live 5-day event with myself, Antonia Dodge, and Dr. Dario Nardi right now. So I've been talking a lot about making personality types operational. It's kind of a non-sexy word, operational, blah. We could use active, alive, something that's visceral. And I think personality needs to be more like sex. Honestly. It needs to be more like sex. And it's not. And I'm frustrated by this. So let's think about sex for a second. Your parents are usually the people that teach you about sex. Teach you what? About sex. They don't teach you sex. They teach you about sex. It'd be very inappropriate for them to teach you directly. Right? So we learn it in theory as a child. We learn the theory of what sex means. Right? Or maybe class, maybe it's like sex ed or something. We learn it theoretically. And it's all up in our heads and we understand it. We might know a lot about it. Like our parents, Antonia talks about her mom sitting her down and drawing like,
I knew what the vas deferens was when I was like 7.
Right? Like she drew it out and showed her all the mechanisms and components.
I was like,
I'm sure T.I. that you love that, right?
Yeah, I was like, cool. Now I know.
Yeah. So she knew all like the information around it, the theory, she had it all in her head. But is that sex? Is that sex? No. Usually we learn with our peers hands-on, right? Sex is typically really learned operationally, meaning we experience it, and that is how we have a full knowing of what it is and what it means for us and how we experience it, right? It has to be embodied to get the complete picture. We've all seen the movie The 40-Year-Old Virgin, right? It's like you can know about all of it, you can know everything, but until you actually perform something, until you actually do something, until you operate something, you're missing a major component of the process, of the learning. Why isn't personality type more like sex, is my question. Why do we learn it and we only go half measure? We get all of the information. We know what the vas deferens is in relation to that. We know all the components, all the parts, all the theory, all the structure, everything we possibly know. I know everything going, but then we fall short of having experiences around it. We don't operate it. I think of the world of tarot. And I'm envious. I'm so envious of tarot. There aren't conferences of people coming together talking about the meaning of the major arcana. They're not coming and talking about this. They're not coming and talking about, okay, well, 3 of Pentacles. But I don't think that's the definition of 3 of Pentacles. I think it's blah, 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 blah. No. I'm envious because every time people are talking about tarot, they're in the middle of a tarot reading for themselves or somebody else. And I'm very, very envious of this because I wish personality type was more like this. I wish we had experienced personality type first. And then, okay, what does this mean? Then we go look for the information to apply to what we're experiencing. It's kind of my personal mission to make type operational. Somehow, and I don't know how we're going to do this yet, but this is the goal of getting this into more of a physical, visceral, actual thing, right? Again, I said this the other night. This is how we beat the machines. This is how we keep it human. And I think personality profiling is one of those components. I think it makes it operational. I think when somebody has an experience of type going through a profiling session, one-on-one with somebody, and you help them, you actually watch them see themselves, I think they have an experience. They operate it and they go, oh yeah, what does this mean? How does it? They're starting with the experience and then they're asking the information.
and then you're there to provide it because you're carrying it with you. You are the instrument in a way. And so this is a powerful framework, I think, profiling. It's one aspect that we can see operational, human to human, psyche to psyche, and it goes all the way back to Carl Jung, who started off this. It's emerged from human to human connection interaction. So tonight I would like to explore a couple other ideas on how we could make type more operational, more active, more visceral, more alive in our lives. Like, how can this become something that we experience and other people, we can take the experiences of other people, they don't have to know all the theory. They don't have to know all I, J, SE, this and that, yet they can just have an experience of type first, personality, start to see aspects of themselves, and it's a breadcrumb trail. You know, you're like, questions I'm sure you've asked yourself, how do I get my friends and family more into this? How do I get them to experience, I'm so excited about this. I've seen the power in it. How do I get other people involved? I think it's operation. I think it's something that's active that they start with and they experience, and then they want more. They're hungry for something more. So finding access points, availability, ways that people can experience this first is really what I'm on the hunt for. And I think that's the key to unlocking this writ large and ensuring we preserve the humanity in all of this, as we're going to have a temptation as humans to let the machines take over for us. I'm just going to download an app, it'll profile me. Yeah, that's what I'll do. No, you're missing a huge component. It is the human psyche to psyche analog experience of two people talking that you cannot replicate with AI or digitization or anything like this that's coming for us. And again, the other day I said, there's going to be a huge crisis, existential crisis of meaning when people's roles are no longer how they define them. When AI comes along and starts taking jobs from people, they're going to say, well, who am I if I'm not what I do? And so they're going to probably be very open and hungry for experiences to understand the self and understand how they're wired more. So let's talk a little about this. We asked Dr. Dario Nardi to come join us tonight. We're going to be doing some really cool stuff with EEG in a few minutes. But I also have Antonia here with me too. Let's talk a little bit about some of the ideas of making personality types operational. You brought some cards. We have some profiling cards here. We're going to talk about EEG, but what are some other ideas? And do you buy my premise, Dario, that you think type needs to be operational, or are you disagreement of that?
No, I go back to when my sister learned about type, and I brought David Kiersey's book, Please Understand Me, home. And this was before the World Wide Web existed. And my mom was very excited by the book, and I was excited by it. And my sister, who's much younger than I am, an ENFP, I mean, her attitude was just like, oh, I'm already very good with people. And she was maybe 15, 16 at the time. And she didn't take a look. She just really this is like not one of my things for a year. And then she came around one day and she had been having some like problems with her friends. And all of a sudden she's like, can I look at that type book? Yeah. And that's, and then she got a little bit of trouble because I think there's a disadvantage to learning type too early also. So I do slightly disagree because sometimes we can say yes to things. It's like, oh, they're doing that because of their type, when in fact that's also like not good for us.
Yeah, I've seen that with psychedelics. People taking psychedelics before they're ready. It's like opens something in their brain and they're not ready for that. And they probably should have waited for more maturity.
Yeah.
As an example of something that I also think is operational that needs to be reserved for people that are prepared for it.
Yes, yeah. So that's, so overall, yes. I mean, that's my experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think?
The idea of making type operational, I mean, this is something you've been on about, so I've been thinking a lot about it. But it's hard to do because it's so abstract. And that's one of the rubber hits the road. Like, at what point do you study enough theory where you start bringing it to your day-to-day life and you start creating a life around it? And I don't mean like as an overvaluing of a specific system, because we are not our type. So it's not like we want to design an entire life based around a 4-letter code or our cognitive functions. But we do want to be able to mine the power out of the system. And so different elements like knowing one's judging function should, like your own, it should change how you make decisions. Like if you are a person who is wired, take for example myself as somebody who has ENTP preferences, for the first half of my life I made most of my decisions using extroverted feeling. I did, right? I handed a lot of power over to people. I aligned with them socially. If everybody else thought something, I was like, well, I guess I'm wrong because everybody else thinks this thing. I just handed so much power over to other people. Understanding that introverted thinking is my preferred function, it didn't just change how I made decisions, it made me reevaluate my entire life, and I ended up kind of burning it to the ground because I was like, oh, I'm living a lie. I didn't know that. So in my experience, and in some ways that saved my life, I would say, or like saved my soul. Maybe not my life, but it saved my soul. Like I got to have myself back. And so in my mind, when I think about making type operational, I mean, I think of it as like legitimately changing my experience of life based on recognizing what my strengths are and what I should be fostering. And in that way, it was a matter, like as soon as I learned that I had introverted thinking, because I had known I was an ENTP from like the time I was like 14 years old. I read Please Understand Me, but Kiersey wasn't into functions, and so I didn't learn functions until later. And when I discovered I had introverted thinking, one of the first things I did is I was like, well, then I probably should learn formal logic. Like that's the thing I should probably do. So I started learning formal logic, and then I was like, I should probably learn a little bit about philosophy, and I should probably, learn what all of these biases are. And it was a very short amount of time that I went from like, oh, I should probably learn formal logic to, oh, my life is a lie, right? It was a very short amount of time. And then from that point, it was just a matter of learning how to extract myself from a life that was actually like one that I had outsourced everything. And so I needed to stop doing that and be irresponsible and bring it in-house. So to me, making type operational means honoring our preferred functions. It means making different decisions. It means recognizing that we should not be leaning as much on our weaknesses. And some of the easiest ways to do that, and I think this is where you're headed, is to create a more sort of tactile experience. We had this experience the last time when we were in Seattle, at the Profiler Training event in Seattle. And our good friend who has INFJ preferences has a son who's about 10 years old. And, it's like hard to know what their type is at that point, but he looks like he might have ENTJ preferences. But, it's young. He's young. So we were kind of talking about the system, and he was kind of taken to it, and he's like, that's really interesting. And the second we brought out the cards, immediately he grabbed them and took to them, and he was like putting them in different orders and like sort of orchestrating like, oh, so this is what my dad's personality type is in all these cards, and this is what my mom's personality type is in all her cards. And he's like, they don't share any of the same cards, right? And well, at that point they were divorced, and so his little 10-year-old mind was like, oh.
He's piecing
together a whole bunch of information. Right? He's like, oh, this makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, he doesn't know the whole theory.
Within like 10 minutes.
Yeah, he doesn't know the entire theory. It wasn't like he had like gone, okay, so when you have SE tertiary, that means blah, 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 blah. He just like looked at the cards and was like, oh. And now his little 10-year-old mind could piece together so much information that I'm sure he had been very confused by. Now, did he now create an ergonomic lifestyle around being an ENTJ if he is as a 10-year-old? No, he's like going to school and he's playing sports and he's like playing video games. But in some ways, that just operating it on that level allowed him to get a massive insight, and now he's kind of into type, right? And as he gets older, he'll have the benefit of understanding what his cognition is, and he'll have the benefit of being able to make better decisions based on that piece of information. So the operational component, when I think of it, I think of, I should learn formal logic. And that was operating, right? Like I was like operating a new skill. But this idea of making it tactile, making it something that you can play with, making it so that the insights come fast without having to learn everything. Because there's a certain, one of the ways that people tend to make it operational is that they have to learn the entire system, or they have to learn so many aspects of the system before they start to realize how it can have power in their life. But you make things like gameplay or cards or simulations or, right, like making it kind of fun and energetic, looking at things in a more tactile way, you can get the same benefit or some of the same benefits in a very short amount of time that might have taken a long time of understanding theory. So am I close to what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah.
I would add that I also feel that type in almost any endeavor, I mean, just encountering people in different professions, doing different kind of work, can really take the person, even if they have talent in what they're doing, let's say that they're a therapist or they're an actor or a business person, like whatever they're doing, that it can take it from B work to A work, or at least B to A minus, because all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is what's holding me back. Right. Because it might even be that they are working from their strengths, their talent, but there was also going to be limitations that come with that. And so it's not like the whole person's life needs to suddenly undergo a big upheaval, but it could be that it also adds a lot to the quality of life. And I found it really funny one time. So I was in this like acting prep class, and I'm doing this exercise, and my SP friend comments afterwards like, "Oh, I could practically see you," like, and I don't remember what he said quite, but it was basically like doing tactics, like thinking about this and changing that and doing whatever. And I'm like, actually, I don't do that at all. Like, that's what you do. What I do is I just put myself into like a trance state that I selected that like works for this activity, and then I just trusted the trance state, and it will carry me as far as I've been able to develop that trance state. And I actually wasn't thinking of any of those things that you said. He didn't believe me at first because he was so anchored in his own way of doing things.
Which brings up the point that Operation Axis won't be the same for everybody.
Yeah.
Like we did an event, I don't know, it was the last one or the one before, where you did some narrative-based gameplay, where you were reading like stories, or I think it was stories and narratives out of the book.
Yeah.
Kind of getting people into a role, like a role of seeing somebody through the lens of that narrative. So that's like one access point potentially. Like maybe it's storytelling, narrative, gameplay. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's card gameplay, more like competitive gameplay, not as cooperative storytelling. I mean, maybe it's EEG is the first. I knew that Darren and you were out at Tiago Forte's second brain conference recently in LA, right? Doing like 100 brain scans in like 2 days or something.
It's a little bit insane, but it worked.
So maybe that's the first time somebody gets, the instinct, oh, wait, what's behind this? They didn't know type. They weren't type people, but they were talking about, and I think this is the other thing, the 4 subtypes also makes that very accessible, like the EEG, which is cool. So I think some of these elements are, hang tight. I think some of these elements are access points. We could probably get some questions in a few minutes here if you want to do that. Just give me a few minutes. These are access points, but they're going to be different for everybody, right? Different people are going to need different types of access points. It's all going to be one size fits all. And clearly we know type, and that's why people are going to need things differently. So what are some of these things? Can we get a little more detailed around maybe some of the access points around this, or we can go right into EEG as well if you'd like to do that.
I mean, I found one way I've used EEG, a number of years ago, I was asked to give an introduction to type, or rather the 4 temperaments, to a group of 17 medical doctors at UCLA who are also managers. And very quickly, the doctors, of course, like they're busy. This is during like a long lunch break. I think one guy who was ESTP and definitely identified as SP in the group later was skeptical at the beginning, not like hostile, but like friendly skeptical. And so I'm like, oh, well, let me back up for a minute and tell you about what I do with brain imaging. And after literally just 2 or 3 minutes of talking about that, he's like, oh, okay. And then that was enough of an opening. And many times when I introduce people who are new to type, I don't start with the type first and then let's do a brain imaging session. I start with the EEG and they get the results, and then we go into type afterward. And that's a really nice introduction. For other people, I mean, I get this a lot. They're like, couldn't you write more content about each type? Like stories or case studies or type descriptions. I mean, we have a lot of type descriptions on the internet, and they have strengths and weaknesses. One reason I did the teaching tales is because like, oh, people like stories, and I was motivated to do that. Yet I encountered a woman who was a PhD student and considered herself an intuiting type, and she knew type and was just, I'm very creative and this and that, and I don't get the stories at all. Now, my natural reaction as an INTJ is that you are an idiot. But, because, no, and I'm like, you see all these other people like who read and responded about the book and they all get it. They're not made up people. So clearly you're in a minority. So maybe it's you. But I think we have to go back to the fact that yes, it depends a lot on people's background and the ways they process information, and like different people have different inputs. And for many people, I think the doorway to type is around relationships.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So I think one of the reasons why this is such a relevant question is to go back to what you said, Joel, which is how do I get people into this? That's like one of the number one questions I think that we get emailed in.
Maybe ask that to themselves, like, how do I help get my friends and family into this? No? Yes?
No?
See a couple of
Yeah, there's nods.
Show me hands. Like
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
I'm not asking you to stand up or do anything. Just show me your hands. All right, there we go.
So, Yeah, and not everybody is super into systems and models, right? It's complicated. You have to hold a lot of information in your head. A lot of us, as far as I can tell, type is to some extent the wand chooses the wizard. You know, like, why are we into type? Can we really explain it? I don't know. I don't know if I could. I just know I got bit by a bug, and then all of a sudden I'm here, like, 30 years later. Oh my gosh, 30 years later. So,
how old are you?
I know, right? I recently had a birthday. It's really kind of wigging me out how old I really am. So, not everybody gets bit by this bug, but that doesn't mean that not everybody could benefit from the information. So how do I get people into it? And I think making type, like making it more tactile, making it more physical, making it more tangible, having all these different access points and entry points is one of the ways that we can get people in our lives into it. They don't have to be as obsessed as we do. And kind of to some extent, it's kind of nice that we're the expert, right? We're like, yeah, I just want people into it. I don't want them knowing more than me. Like, I just don't want to be the expert, but I at least want to be able to talk about it with them, right? And so it's okay that not everybody is like at an expert level, but at least that they can engage. And these different ways of operating, because sometimes people are more hands-on learners, right? Or they need to touch something, or they need something that feels like it has some credential or legitimacy to it, or whatever it is, right? This is how we introduce type to loved ones, not just so that we can have the pleasure of being able to talk about it with somebody else in our life, but also because it legitimately could help their experience. Because one of the ways it ends up becoming operational is we start making different decisions in our life based on the information, and that's really the goal. So that's the progression, I think.
Yeah. So then I think my challenge to you would be, let's creatively, well, not right this second, but we could, start tonight, but let's creatively start thinking about, like, what else could make this accessible? What else could make this operational? How else can we give people access points? Maybe they don't have to know everything, right? Some people just, like the other day when the woman said, what are you doing in this conference? I'm like, well, how do I make this accessible for somebody that has no context with, like, how do I explain profile trading to somebody that's not even like, not going to read an information page or anything. I just said it really quick. So I just said to her, I don't know if everybody's in the room when I said it earlier, but I was like, well, I said, you know how FBI profilers, right? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, how they're looking for people's criminality. They're trying to profile to see how the brain went wrong, and it's all criminal in there. I said, well, we kind of do that, except for what people's awesomeness and possibilities are, like how awesome they're wired, not their criminality, but their coolness and their awesomeness and their genius. She's like, oh, okay, seem to get it. Is that really what we're doing? I mean, that's kind of sort of what we're doing, but that was the access point that woman could handle when she asked me that. And I think that she went away with a basic understanding of what we're doing in here. So I tried to give her to the level that she could take, and the access point, I knew she's not going to sit through an explanation of profile trading. So I thought that's a quick trim tab. And if she wants more, she'll ask me for more. She'll be like, oh, well, now I'm interested. Tell me more. So it's like these kinds of things. Like, how do we get type to that level in different access points for people? And there's breadcrumbs. People, you're going to discover, and it goes back to some of the client work we were talking about last night. Like, how do you position this to try to draw people in, maybe to the coaching or therapy work or profiling work you want to do? Well, if you have access points and people can follow down that trail, that gets them to you to be able to provide some of the help that you want to provide someone, right? But we got to draw them in through things that they can get a hold of. So I think that's kind of my encouragement. Any last minute comments before we close out this section? We're going to pivot over.
I do remember years ago, there was someone in my building. I was in graduate school, and he was in business graduate school, and they had just done a variety of tests in class, and the MBTI was one of them.
Yeah.
And so I asked him, how did you come out? And he's like, I ENTP. But he said ENTP, I came out normal.
That's so true. It's the most normal of them all.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in a business entrepreneur program, it would make sense. I just thought, I guess the teacher didn't really explain anything about type, did they? Yes. I do think we do need to be wary of that kind of thing also. And it sort of, I have this little sense that what are the applications of type ultimately? They are the ethical uses of type. So one of those is perspective shifting, for example, and one of those is not trying to reshape others to be like ourselves. There are several of them, the David Kiersey and Isabel Myers, gifts differing. I mean, that's another sort of, what are those are the ethical principles, and those actually become the applications.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that is a key component that the ethics have to be woven into whatever is operational. Yeah. And I think to your point, I'll end with this. There is what you're talking about is vanguarding energy, right? It's like when it goes down to that, when it gets McDonaldized, we talked about the 101 class with extroverted thinking, right? McDonald's is a beautiful system. They brag about the system all the time. 99 billion served. They're not talking about hamburgers. They're talking about how amazing their system is at scale, that they can serve that many hamburgers worldwide consistently for like 60 years. Like that's a feat, right? The TE has dialed that system in. But in order to dial it at that level, like they have to design their systems for people that are illiterate to be able to work them. Like you don't have to read to work at McDonald's. It's got little pictures of small, medium, and large. You just push the button and it comes out. You have to dumb it down that level. I think your concern is potentially that it'll be too McDonaldized it loses its fidelity potentially.
And that happened in the 80s and 90s to some extent.
Yeah.
That the MBTI in organizations, it started to be used a lot. There was just the preferences. People would become confused because they didn't know anything about type development. That wasn't even part of it. Which unfortunately the functions won out. In the internet all of your bases belong to us. So yes.
So I think that's the question: is how do we make it operational while still honoring the ethics and don't water it down, but make it accessible? This is a big puzzle for me to solve, right? For us to solve. We need to think in terms of this, and I would love to see what you come up with over time as a student body. You've been in heavy trainings around this stuff. You have embodied it yourself through the function work we've done here at this event. You've done advanced trainings and coaching trainings, and now it's like, okay, now we can take all this stuff that we've got and let's see if we can find access points. And that's what I'd love to do.
If you're really into this, but there's no output for it, there's no like life changes you're making, if there's no progression beyond the theory, we can almost kind of get caught up in a loop. It's like we get to a point where we feel like we should be doing something with it, but there's nothing to do with it. So then we go back into the system, right? And then we just kind of keep looping there. And so one of the advantages of application and making things operational, like making changes in our life or going and helping people with it or like actually taking it into action, is that we avoid being in sort of this loop, right, of constant theory, constant learning, constant going back in, going back in. It's like we have to have some sort of output and contribution, actually. That's a big piece of it, is contribution. So keeping the ethics and by at the same time making it simple enough to make it usable. I think where I go is now I've got something to do with it. Now I've got an output. Now I've got a way to contribute, and so now I'm not caught up in this little sort of navel gazing theoretical loop. Yeah. So I think that's one of the big advantages.
And Carl Jung had a very practical application that he had to deal with every single day, and that was neurotic patients, one after the next, after the next, after the next. Yeah. And he wasn't satisfied with, I can help like 15% of them or something like that. That he really was looking for. He said, no, I'm not a mystic. I'm actually very serious about the human condition and helping people. And what is the fundamental techniques and principles that can help the vast majority of people who come into my office. And even then, even when they would learn type and they would learn the techniques and active imagination, this and that, there's still some very funny stories where those people were still sort of hopeless in a way. But they still had moved up a level at least.
Yeah, I've been calling type like a sword in the stone, where we can feel the power emanating off of it. And we sort of circle that rock and we're like, there's something powerful there. And now we just have to figure out how to pull the sword out of the stone. But now I am almost imagine Jung like sticking the sword in the stone. You know what I mean? It's like that was forged through the work of dealing with, people who needed analysis, and so it was like folded steel over and over and over and over again, working with psyches, and then he took this beautiful thing he had forged and he stuck it in a stone for those who dare to pull it out and understand its use.
All right, so that was myself, Antonia, Dr. Dario Nardi on the main stage at the 5-day personality profiler training event, the most recent event, time of this recording, in Orlando, Florida. And we had a group of students there, both the 101 students, the profiler training 101 students. We also had advanced students in our advanced profiling course and also personality coaching course. There were 3 different classes in that room. In the evenings, we gather all 3 classes together to have talks like this. In fact, right after this talk, Dario demonstrated some EEG. We had some volunteers come up and we did some EEG readings, and we unpacked some of that on the stage as well.
Which is becoming like a major feature or a main feature of every one of our live events. We have an EEG practitioner that offers the ability to do a brain scan and help you nail down your subtype, right? So if you're familiar with subtypes right now, that nails down your subtype. It nails down sort of what you were in the past and what subtype you're moving towards. And it also helps with what Darren Yee, who is one of the students that went through Dario's Tools of the Future course and is now becoming an EEG practitioner and just absolutely killing it, honestly.
Yeah.
He said that a major piece of the EEG scans is the ability to find hidden talents, things that you wouldn't even be aware of yourself, even knowing your best fit type. Even if you know your best fit type, not every single person that has the same best fit type shares the exact same hidden skills. Yeah. And so that's a really nice piece of that.
Well, I think that's something that's operational.
That's operational.
It's visceral.
That's right.
It's tangible.
Yes.
When somebody walks past somebody else with a brain imaging cap on their head.
Yeah.
I've seen people go, I don't know what's happening, but I want somebody to do that to me. Like, they don't even know what's going on.
I don't know what's happening, but I want it.
And I think in the talk, this talk that you just watched or listened to, I think those are the things I'm on the hunt for, and we're on the hunt for. Yep. And I'm encouraging, you heard me encourage the students to begin looking for these things.
Yes.
How do we find things that are almost touch points? You mentioned the talk about, our friend's 10-year-old son who used cards. How do we get people excited about personality types and get into this through those touch points, those access points?
We didn't know it when we delivered that talk because it was going to happen the following Sunday. But for the bonus day, Dario led multiple tables of basically role-playing games that were type-oriented, meaning that every single person took a cognitive function and then embodied it, like personified it, and that was their character. Yeah. And so people were learning more about type and how type plays out in a story or a narrative, which basically our lives are all stories and narratives. Yeah. How it plays out in terms of what it means to be maybe a function that you have or maybe a function you don't have. And then how would somebody be making choices with that? How would they be acting, or what would their behavior be? And so it helps you learn more about type, but it also helps you learn about how these things play out in the real world. Yeah. And it wasn't on this talk. I think it was a different talk for that same week where and maybe I've said this on the podcast before, but the reason why, and when you first said, I want to talk about making type operational, I was like, what does that even mean, Joel? What do you even mean by making type operational?
Doesn't sound very sexy, does it?
It's totally not sexy. It is like not a marketing term at all. But it is a practical term. And operational is like, it's operating it almost as like it's a tool in your hand that you're operating, or something that is creating an impact or effect, and it's operational. So as you started to talk about this more and more in recent times, this goes back to how I've always seen type as like a sword in the stone. And my suspicion is that the reason why people came and tried to pull the sword out of the stone in the sort of Arthur Merlin mythos is that the sword had a hum about it. It like emanated a sense of energy. And people were just attracted and drawn to it. And then, of course, the myth of, or the legend, whoever pulls the sword from the stone will become king of England. Yeah. So obviously there was like a desire for power and a role or status. But the sword itself hummed. And I feel like for some of us, when we become familiar with type, it has a similar phenomena. We can just kind of feel like there's power here. There's a hum about the system. There's something about it that attracts us. And we want to use it in some way. The challenge is that we don't always know what it means to turn it operational. We don't always know what it means to make it practical. And so we try to pull the sword from the stone, and we never succeed. So we end up just sort of studying it and circling it and looking at it. And this is what I see like a lot of online conversations and content. Yeah. It's a lot of like, let's just keep digging back into the theory. Okay, so we feel like we've figured everything out we can. What do we do now? And sometimes people like start questioning their type and start trying to figure out if they're a different personality type than they thought they were before. And that's like a way to re-engage with it and try to get its power out. Yeah. Sometimes they expand on it and like turn it into their own set of theories. And they fillet it out and add to it and, come up with their own stuff. There's a lot of different ways that people try to pull the sword from the stone. But I think pulling the sword from the stone isn't re-engaging with the content over and over. Yeah. It's actually using it as a sword in your life. A sword of like, when I think of a sword, I think of something that like is in front of you and can be used for a lot of different purposes, right? Yes. Like swords aren't, sometimes people used, or in the past, they used swords to like chop wood, right? Because they were trying to make a fire when they were out, like traveling. People used swords as symbols of strength and honor. They used it as ways, like it's sharp, it creates clarity. Like there's a lot of sort of archetypal meaning to a sword. And I think when we use type in the way that was originally intended, to clean slice things, to make things clear, to be able to, to do practical activities like chopping wood or whatever, but also to bring down your enemies and to give yourself a sense of power and to learn how to use it with, some skill. When we do that with type, it has the power to transform our lives.
Yes.
It has the power to help us like live the life we were supposed to. That's its point of origin. It's Carl Jung's work on trying to help us become our whole selves.
Yeah.
And so making type operational is making type something that allows us to navigate to become the person we've always been, but we have not always seen it clearly.
Yes. I think Dario raised I need to lay this down because I got a couple things. Well, I'll just say this. To use that sword, you don't need to know the materials in it. You don't need to know which metals it's made of or how it's made.
Yeah. This is folded steel.
Or the theory behind how those materials go in. It's the point of the talk. And then you also don't have to have fencing techniques or know how to fence to use a sword. Now, if you know fencing techniques, you'll use a sword more elegantly, most likely.
Right.
Like if you have technique or you have training, you're probably gonna wield that sword with proficiency.
That's right.
But you don't have to have training to use it.
Yeah.
Right? You can just use the sword. And I do want to mention, though, something that Dario talked about when we were talking on stage in the talk we just watched. He really brought up this idea of ethics. And it's like we all go, okay, yeah, I get it, ethics. Like, yeah, of course we want to do it ethically. But I think what he's trying to say is we don't want to distill it down to operation like in a work context in an HR department.
Right.
Where we have
hire and fire.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's not paper-based, we have a personality profiler trained by us even that goes in and says, oh, well, you're ENTJ, you can't do this job.
Right.
We need an FE user or a Harmony user for this job.
Yeah.
That would be an unethical operational use of personality type.
Yep.
So we do have to be careful with how we create operation around it. But I don't think we should be scared about that too much. I mean, that's mostly like just a cautionary thing. But there are a ton of ways I think we could find to operate personality type and have access points for it that wouldn't be unethical, right?
Yeah.
And I think to me, the measure of this would be, can I use type to help people without them knowing I'm using type to help them? Because a lot of people say, if only my friends knew type, I could help them. If my roommates knew that they were this judging function and I'm this judging function, well, now we'd have shared content and I could then help them. Once they know, I have to teach them the system and teach them their type. And once they know, now we can go forward.
Yep.
I don't think that's typing at the operational level yet.
Right.
For me, personally, how I define it, because it requires understanding for operation. And I don't even know if this is possible, what I'm talking about. This is speculative. But I think if I can help, just like your spouse, let's say you've got a partner or a married, I know you want to say something. I'm sorry. I'm still on this thought run real quick. Just get out of my head before I lose it.
Yeah.
Your partner may not be interested in type or want to learn type, but you could still improve your relationship and make type operational in your relationship without the other partner even knowing that you're using personality type to do it. But you could understand them and understand yourself and still operate your life differently based on an understanding there. So the holy grail, or the sword in the stone, I'll say, of this for me is being able to use it without the other person having to know the theory or know the system at all.
I would 100% agree. Totally.
I feel like that's really a place that I want to get to.
Well, and I mean, we understand its power by using it for ourselves first.
Yeah.
And then observing actions taken that were honoring our type preferences, then make it much easier to interact with other people, whether they're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
And a recent example that I have, and I wasn't trying to interrupt you. I apologize.
No, I just our ideas are coming.
I so rarely
fast.
have an example that when I do, I'm like, everybody stop talking. I have an example. One that I didn't have to like think about forever or source from GPT or whatever. So my uncle recently died, my mother's older brother. who I always really liked, my Uncle David. I always thought he was great. I suspected, my mom has INFJ preferences, and I always kind of suspected that my Uncle David also had NJ preferences of some kind. I don't know exactly what type, but he felt like he was also a user of introverted intuition or perspectives. So he recently died, and I didn't know this, but apparently he had Alzheimer's towards the end. Now, the reason why I didn't know that is because I'm estranged from my family, as I've mentioned a million times, right? Like, none of my family talks to me. I don't have a relationship with any of them. My immediate family, for the most part, and my extended family, with the exception of my brother, who is also has since left the religion of our youth. So I just don't get to see anybody, and I don't think I've talked to my Uncle David in probably 15 years. So when I discovered, my mother let me know, she texted me, let me know that he had died, and I know, not because I've profiled her, but just because I was familiar with her my entire life, that my aunt most likely has ISFJ preferences. And I went back and forth. Should I send her flowers? Would that be a breach of the boundary because she hasn't talked to me? Or should I go ahead and do it out of respect and honor for my uncle? And I went ahead and did it. I was like, she has ISFJ preferences. This is not a time when she's going to be doubling down. She's in pain. Her partner, like her life partner, her backpacking buddy through life of the last 50 years probably, has just died. This is not an ideological moment for her. This is a grieving moment. And knowing that people who she's not thinking about anymore are still thinking about her and are grieving with her, I think would touch her. So I sent her a really like one of the biggest, how you can do like the small, medium, and large version. I sent her a large version of a bouquet of flowers that tried to be both at the same time thoughtful but also cheerful. So, but it wasn't like a bunch of sunflowers, but it was like something that was almost like it was almost bittersweet. And the card I wrote was effectively acknowledging that I hoped she took solace in her memories and also in her hope for the future, like her religious hope or her faith. And apparently I did the exact right thing, right? She was very grateful. She let me know she was grateful. I was grateful. She let me know she was grateful. And we had this moment of thawing, right? Like there was like this, it was like a touch point, like I got to have with my aunt. And I don't know if I would have taken that action had I not known her type.
Yeah.
Had I not known she had ISFJ preferences. And other people, I'm not saying that people who aren't ISFJs wouldn't have also appreciated the flowers, but I'm talking about how like it's a complicated situation to navigate. Like I wasn't sure, I didn't have certainty. I didn't know because of the, like, would the boundaries, like that, not that we had ever talked about them, but like just what I knew, like, would I be overstepping? Would it be a problem? And I just went, I bet an ISFJ will be appreciative though. I bet they will. And it ended up being right. And so it's like, how often, that's an example. I never have an example, so I wanted to share it. But it's like, how often am I doing that? All the time. All the time. I'm navigating with people based on meeting them where they're at and what they would appreciate. And I think that it has been wildly successful in terms of relationships. And so that's a way where the sword is powerful. Yeah. Right. Like it's a navigational structure. It like leads me to things. And I'm so grateful that I have it. And so making it operational is also at a point where you're like, what would I do without this tool? Yeah. Like if you start thinking like, how would I navigate the world without this tool? I don't even know. Yeah. That's when you know you're making it operational. Yeah. So I think some of the things that we're tuned into, the personality profiling session itself between two people, I feel is very operational. It's something that you can do with personality types, like to help somebody arrive at their best fit type. I think helping them feel seen. Yeah, helping them feel seen. And then obviously if that carries into coaching, which a lot of our students take it into the coaching realm, right, which I encourage. I mean, I think when you sit with somebody and you walk the journey with them, unpacking their psychology, talk about the rapport, the tracks being laid of understanding. Right. The person kind of unconsciously is like, look, whatever you coach me to is probably going to be helpful because you just helped me see myself in a way that I've never seen myself before. Yep. So it's a very powerful operation there too. We've been playing with card decks. I don't know if you listening or watching right now have seen, I've been posting some right now, time of this recording. I hope to do more, just some card model readings using our cards, our profiling cards that we've used for our internal trainings. Now I'm putting them out for everybody. I'm like, why? Let's let everybody use these cards. Yeah. What would come of it based on our friend's son at 10 years old, really taking to them? I'm like, this is something. And it reminds me of tarot, like I mentioned in the talk. Right. Like no one's sitting around talking about the theory of tarot.
they're doing readings with each other.
Yeah.
Like that's where the tarot world goes. It doesn't matter what your feelings are about tarot. I'm just talking about the operational level of tarot. And then I think EEG is another avenue of that. But I think what would be interesting is to get a conversation started under this podcast around things. Oh, well, I think the other operational thing too, we call them personality owner's manuals for a reason. We assume you're owning yourself, you're owning your personality, you're owning your life, and you're going to operate your life with a new understanding, an owner's manual of what you're going to operate in life. Like you don't buy an owner's manual for a car you're not intending to drive, or you wouldn't access an owner's manual for a car you wouldn't own or possess or actually put on the road. I guess maybe some people theoretically study owner's manuals, but we call them nerds.
Well, and I didn't even...
I can't imagine like pouring through an owner's manual for like a 66 Chevy unless you're just a really nerdy Chevy lover or something.
Right. And actually, I just realized that an alternative name for owner's manual is operational manual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've thought about calling it operator manual.
Yeah.
But, owner's manual, you own your life, you own your stuff, you own your shadow. I think it speaks to more of the journey because you start with an owner's manual for your type, one of the 16 types. Our hope is you start there, you handle your trauma looping, you handle your grips, you get onto the ergonomic life designed for you. You set up the ideal day of exactly how you want your day to be running. You start building toward that and you go, maybe I should look at my shadow stuff. And then you come into our personality life path mentorship, you dig up shadow stuff, you create a system map, you get on your path. Yeah. Then you want to train for profiler training, and then you want to get into coaching. And now you've brought it all back to the beginning where maybe you were helped by type, and now you're a coach helping others in the same framework. That's my desire for you listening. if you're to follow Joel's path for your life, that's what it would go with. So under this podcast, what would happen if we got a conversation running where you talked about, you listening, come up with some creative ways? What are other access points we could think about for personality type? What are other ways we could make this more visceral or operational? What are ways that we could make this tangible for people? They can access it. It's something real in their life. It's visceral. It's alive. It's something that lives and breathes within us and among us, not just something we go to the internet to learn or a video to watch and study or to just think about, but it's an engaging process. So I'd love to have that conversation. Head over to personalityhacker.com after you get yourself your owner's manual or enroll for one of the higher level classes. Then make a comment under this episode and leave your feedback. Make a comment, ask a question, more importantly, share your story. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed the podcast, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review, particularly on Apple Podcasts, I'm very, very pleased by that. Please help me out and let me know that people are listening by leaving a rating and a review.
You had this moment this week. You're like, I haven't gotten a review or rating. I don't know. Are people listening? Or I think there was like a recent election and I think people were distracted.
I think so too.
And so you're like, I gotta get my fuel. I gotta get fed for this. So I'm also encouraging people to leave a rating and review as well.
Yeah, that's right.
On your behalf, Antonia.
I'm going to get really pitiful otherwise. So if you do that for me, that would be awesome. And as Joel mentioned, check out our programs, particularly a Personality Life Path program. It's a banger. It's such a banger. It's such a great program. People come in and go like, oh, I thought I was just going to learn something about type. And it's like, no, you discover your soul. That's the purpose of that program. Now, I don't want to get anybody intimidated. Like, I don't know if I'm ready to discover
It's probably
my
better
soul.
if you don't know what you're getting into.
Yeah, actually, it's just a little bit of stuff about type. It's not that big of a deal, but come to Personality Life Path because it's a banger. It's a banger.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.